Welcome to the Connect with TrueSight webinar series. During today's webinar, you're able to ask questions of our panelists. The questions and answers will be published along with the webinar recording a week from today's webinar. Our topic is TSCO, Creating Business Service Views. Reinaldo will take us through this content, and I'll turn it over to Reinaldo.
Thank you, Greg. My name is Reinaldo Chacon. I've been working with BMC since 2015, and I've been providing support to TrueSight Capacity Optimization, that is also known as TSCO. I am certified on capacity optimization, and today we are going to talk about creating business services views by CSV Parser or Database Extractor ETLs. So now let's take a look at today's agenda. Before we start with the heavy content, for simplicity, I will be referring to TrueSight Capacity Optimization as TSCO. In today's webinar, Connect with TrueSight, we will run into theoretical information and demos to show you how to implement these projects in real life. On the overview, I will be talking about how the ETLs work and how the business service views show content based upon data collected. Next, we will discuss what type of CSV Parser ETL are part of the TSCO suite, as well as the Database Extractor ETL. As an important note, I will explain in detail single lookup and multiple lookup capability and how to identify them when creating an ETL. This significantly helps to reduce the risk of having duplicates once the ETL finishes its execution. The next topic is focused on how to create a relationship in TSCO, which fields and values should be part of an input file or query, taking into consideration that the lookup values may play an important role in this particular step if you have a multiple lookup environment. Then we will focus on creating relationship ETL that uses a text file to build up the relationships in the TSCO workspace. We will learn how to create an open ETL template to easily use it when creating a new parser or database extractor ETL. And now we are going to go for the demos. We will demonstrate on the next two topics how to create a relationship CSV ETL and database extractor ETL to build up a relationship in the workspace domain. Lastly, we will verify how the views should be configured to create business service pools, and this allows data to be displayed on the view after some time. The last point is to review some troubleshooting steps that may help us to successfully display data in the workspace domain. TrueSight Capacity Optimization is a capacity management solution that gives you the insight to optimize the use of IT resources that you already have and to plan for new ones. It collects and analyzes the data and core metrics for CPU, memory, and storage and provides recommendations for optimizing them. With TrueSight Capacity Optimization, you can model future resources and predict what IT resources you will need. The IT infrastructure includes physical, virtual, containers, private cloud, and public clouds. TSCO provides the following key capabilities. 1. Capacity visibility. 2. Risk management. 3. Resource optimization. And 4. Capacity planning. So now let's take a look at the business service. This is a general term that describes work that supports businesses and it's delivered to customers by business units. So let's see an example. We have a delivery or financial services to customers of a bank or goods to the customer for a retail store. Successful delivery of business service often depends on one or more IT services. A business service may consist in almost entirely of an IT service as an online banking service or an internal website where product orders can be placed by business customers. So, in other words, a business service is a set of interconnected applications and hosts which are configured to offer a service to the organization. Then, an application is also being referred to as business application performs a specific business function within the business service. It typically contains multiple technologies, layers. For example, a web server, an app server, or a DB server. And lastly is the service pools. A service pool is a group of resources that form an infrastructure of technology layer within an application or business service. This grouping of resources is useful for capacity planning because they contribute to share workloads and are usually sized together. So now let's see some use cases. As a capacity planner, I want to compute resource usage as saturation risk for my company's application and business services so that I can proactively engage services owners in capacity planning. As a capacity planner, I want to reduce the amount of time it takes to produce a service-aware resource utilization report for my business, and I can get more done. As a service owner, I want to investigate my service resource utilization on demand so I can understand bottlenecks and potential performance problems before they occur. In this overview, we are going to see the ETLs in the business service view. So an ETL is a program that extracts, transforms, and loads. It's a process that is realized by different modules that run on top of a common engine. As shown on the diagram, the data import process is divided in 3 phases: the data extraction, the transformation, and the loading. The data extraction basically reads the data from an external database or file. These data are generally gathered by a third-party monitoring application. If the source data resides on a file, the extractor feeds them to a parser module, and the data are now converted to the internal representation format, which is the dataset. Now, the transformation phase. This is an optional step, and basically when we have one or more transformer modules that read the dataset and perform some in-memory transformation, this phase is optional and its application depends on the extracted data. And lastly, the loading phase. One or more loader modules store the data into the TSCO data warehouse. By default, TSCO imports the data into its own warehouse and also writes it to a CSV file so it can be used by other applications. So you can also configure a new loader to export the data somewhere else, for example to another database. During the loading phase, the ETL engine stores data into the staging area. The warehousing engine completes the job by processing the data and aggregating all the standard time and time aggregation levels. Once the data has been stored in the database, it can be accessible from different components like analysis, views, etc. Views are available in the presentation server. So let's see now the business service. A business service is any value-added service that is delivered to customers that they want to get a consolidated summary of the business services in their infrastructure. You can use this summary to understand the overall health and the status of a business services. You can drill down into specific business services and view the associated applications. And also a service pool's details and analyze the capacity at the service pool level. After you install and import business services and application data, you can access this view from the TrueSight console to create service pools and start analyzing the data. TSCO produces indicators on risk, usage, and days to saturation for each service pool that you have defined based on the indicator values of contained services. For each business service or application, the indicators value are calculated based on the indicator that values of the contained service pools. The last 30 days of data is considered to be calculated for the indicator values. Now let's see which ETL modules are available for loading data via an input file. TSCO does support a number of parser ETLs to import performance data, business drivers, KPIs, etc., or just to import relationship data that is the scope of this webinar. These ETLs are called generic because they can be integrated easily to pull any information into TSCO database. The common denominator across all these ETL modules is that they parse a CSV in order to import the data, whatever it is. So now let's see what is the difference between the two first topics. So the columnar file parser and the CSV file parser. The difference between those two ETL is that the CSV parser will import one metric name and value per line, whereas the columnar CSV will import multiple metrics per line. Basically, each metric in its own column. If you have a lot of different metrics to import for the same system for each interval, the columnar CSV parser is often the easier to implement. If you are importing a smaller number of metrics, particularly just one, or if you have to import a varied list of data for different intervals, the CSV parser is probably the easier to implement. Let's see an example. If we want to import CPU util, memory util, and CPU usage at the same time, because those samples were collected for one system at a particular timestamp, you can use the columnar CSV parser. Else, use the CSV parser to import a single metric value per unit of time. The custom structure from a CSV parser imports data from a CSV file and placing the data into a buffer table. This temporary table could be truncated or no before data is loaded. This allows to use the data as an input data for another ETL, for a view, or for reporting. Now, the tag CSV Parser ETL is a module that loads tags for entities that are imported by other ETLs. The ETL uses lookup fields to identify the required entities for the shared entity catalog and tag that dataset to manage tags. To configure the ETL, use an input CSV file that is structured according to the dataset and share the entity catalog of the ETL that is collecting the required entities. There are two different actions to be performed with this ETL. One, it automatically applies tags to the entities that are imported by other ETLs in the shared entity catalog, or two, remove tags from the required entities. Lastly, the Object Relationship CSV Parser ETL. This ETL imports relationship data into TSCO. It is the same concept but different because this ETL creates any relationship parent-children in the workspace domain with subdomains and system types. We will see this further in the next slides. In this webinar, we are going to focus on the generic Object Relationship CSV Parser. This ETL builds relationship parent-children on the workspace domain. In order to successfully integrate the ETL, you need to make sure that the input file has a correct information to be loaded. In this case, we need to analyze the CSV file structure to identify which systems are going to be imported. Once done, the next step is to determine what the mandatory columns are. Later, we will see which columns should be placed in the file to create the entity and its relationship. Then, establish relationships and hierarchies among entities. We need to create an appropriate relationship between entities and their parent. That is why we have to make sure where the relationships would go and what type of relationship we will build. Lastly, for this feature, only servers for the following technologies are supported: VMware, Amazon Web Services, Azure, Google Cloud, AIX, Solaris, HPUX, Hyper-V, KVM, SenServer, standalone systems. Virtual node system types are not compatible with the business services view so far. Other systems as storage, network, containers, Azure Classic models, and other deprecated system types listed in our documentation are not supported in service pools and business service view. A database extractor ETL is a generic module that can be connected to an external database to get the desired information. As the CSV parser, there are a number of different modules that import data from any relational database. The requisite is to place the database driver on both ETL server and application server to let the ETL connect properly to extract the data from the data source. The query used to extract the data must extract the data having a specific format to match the lookups in TSCO. Additionally, on the ETL configuration, you can set up the database connection parameters where the database type, database user, and password and database DNS name should be specified. Another available option is to create an external DB connection in TSCO where you can see it as a template to connect your ETL modules to the external data source. So to explain what this module do, let's start with the generic database extractor, both Perl and Java. These ETLs modules require several columns to be in the SQL output with the specific column names that match the data to be imported. With these two modules, you can extract a single metric per system per unit of time, just like the regular CSV Parsers ETL. For columnar database, where they may exist multiple metrics to be extracted for a single system with the same timestamp, you can use these ETLs. These modules have been developed in Java or Perl to give the same functionality. Events SQL Extractor. If you want to import change management events to TSCO to see them in a particular system or a group of systems, this is your ETL. This functionality basically adds a user interface to assist with the creation of your CSV parser or SQL Extractor ETL. Once an open ETL template has been created, you then create a CSV parser or SQL Extractor based upon that open ETL template to actually import the data. You don't need to create or configure new parser or extractor ETL from scratch. In TSCO, the UI allows a quick verification of identified columns for uploaded sample data. Then, the messages help to map data with an indication of missing required fields. Also, it suggests a solution in case an error is detected in the input file. The Open ETL template wizard simplifies the creation of vertical or columnar CSV and SQL Extractor ETLs. In TSCO, the wizard guide through the steps to configure the template. There is also an option to allow to modify the metric mappings. However, no other input parameters can be modified in edit mode. The Open ETL template can be used to quickly create an instance of an ETL. This allows to inherit its properties to another ETL instance created from this template. By design, the changes made to the template are not reflected on the ETL already created. For that reason, any change made to the template will not be set or reflected in already instantiated ETLs. The scope of this template are intended to be used for CSV Parsers ETLs or SQL Extractor ETLs only, but you cannot mix them up. So now let's take a look at identifying lookups. Lookup information is the way TSCO ETLs uniquely identify the entities for which they collect the metrics from. The ETLs use certain properties to uniquely identify these entities. For example, the ETL may use system name or asset ID to identify systems. Before loading metrics into TSCO, the ETL goes through a checklist of entities for which metrics were loaded during any previous ETL runs. This activity is called entity lookup. An entity like a system can be identified by a string like ds_sysname to establish the name of a system. This works only if the string ds_sysname uniquely corresponds to the name of a system in each ETL. The ETL developer needs to construct the ds_sysname string using the exact same method. Only they can share lookup tables or entity catalogs. Sometimes the different data sources for the different connectors do not have the same unique name convention to identify the entities. For example, an asset database may use an asset ID to identify the systems, while a performance monitoring system may identify the system with a fully qualified domain name. In this case, the two ETLs may not be able to use the DSC name to uniquely identify a system. TSCO, therefore, offers a multiple lookup option, where the ETLs look up different fields in a particular sequence to find an entity match. For example, the VMware ETL identifies several fields in order to import this data. The screenshot that you see on the presentation is intended to show how the VMware ETL lookup fields are built. So we have a number of lookup fields and the lookup values. So you have entity type, host name, name, parent VC name, UUID, VMW, VMref, and the compatibility. To facilitate multiple lookup, some of the out-of-the-box ETLs from TSCO have a field called compatibility. Apart from the default DSC name, if you write a custom ETL that you want to integrate with an out-of-the-box ETL like the VMware ETL, then it's recommended that you populate the compatibility field. Multiple lookup fields ETLs. These ETLs populate different lookup fields in order to have a more accurate lookup. Some of the out-of-the-box ETLs like VMware that populates multiple lookup fields populate also a special lookup field called compatibility. If you write a custom ETL, I will recommend you to populate this field. The single lookup field. The ETL populates a single field called default. Sometimes the different data sources for the different connectors do not have the same unique naming convention to identify the entities. So for that reason, we need to check whether or not your system or your environment is suitable for single lookup. When we create an ETL, we usually define a multiple lookup, which provides a better way to map to existing entities in the environment. But it is more complex to define a multiple lookup, so you can start with a single lookup and see how it goes. But be aware that this could lead to issues where the ETL isn't quite able to figure out what to map to. Also, if the connectors are not completely compatible, then sometimes duplicate entities can be loaded in TSCO, and if this happens, then manual reconciliation may be needed in order to discard the duplicates. There are two kinds of lookup entries that can be defined by the ETL. The strong lookup entity that is used by the ETL to identify entities it loaded earlier. These entities are looked in its own lookup table in a way similar to the DSC's name. There can be one or more strong lookup entries defined by an ETL. If there are more than one, then they are defined in a sequence. The first entry in the sequence is tried first. A weak lookup entry is used by the ETL not to identify entities that the ETL loaded earlier, but to match entities loaded by other ETLs. Multiple weak up entries are also defined in a sequence, and they are tried in that particular sequence. The loader's entity lookup process tries all the strong lookup entries first, then all the weak up entries. This means that if there are no other ETLs loading the same entities, only the strong lookup entries are tried. A weak lookup entries are never tested on ETL's own lookup table. They are used only to search in the shared lookup table when no strong lookup combination has been found. In this example, I am going to show how to create a relationship data in a CSV file using multiple lookup approach. You will want to specify the strong lookup fields and weak lookup fields in each line in the data import, since they are used to know which entity to associate data point with. The strong lookup fields and weak lookup fields will only contain the field names, not the lookup values themselves. The lookup values will be contained in the DSC's name column. When you are creating a multiple lookup ETL, the DSC's name values get defined with your lookup fields and the associated values for those fields. In this example, I am calling out the strong lookup field's name and entity type, which are my server 0076 and GM column VMW, which means virtual machine VMware. It is important to note that in a multiple lookup environment, when you assert the app or the system, they should all have multiple lookup values to make the integration work. The fields in red are related to an application, and those define the app type application. This app type is parent of a system underneath it. Moreover, I am using name, a strong lookup field, to match the format applied to the data including systems and subdomains. When the entity is asserted, we have to take into consideration the lookup values that we want to use. For this purpose, I have selected name and entity type, whereas the application we only use name. Note that both app and system use the approach of multiple lookup. It is important that when you define an object, the end canned parent and DS end parent columns do not contain any values when asserting the relationship between objects. The end canned parent and DS parent columns must contain the required values when you are asserting the relationship. I did break down the file to better understand what data belongs to the fields in the line. So we have 1. Timestamp, whose format should be year, month, date, and time in 24 hours format. Change type, which is the case that we will assert. End canned name will be the type to assign the system. In this example, the field could be sys or app. DS end name. Here is where we call out the strong lookup fields and weak lookup fields. For demonstration purposes, I set name and entity type as a lookup fields. The end name is the entity name. The end canned parent and DS canned parent will remain blank when we assert the entities, but you should have values when we assert the relationship. You can see it on the right. Entity type name. In this case, it's GM column VMW, which is virtual machine VMware. This is an internal naming convention in TSCO. And the strong lookup fields, where my two values are name and entity type for the systems and only name for the app. There should be no spaces in the DS end name field. All the lines with the object definition must be filled except for the end canned parent and DS end canned parent, and the relationship to the root app is mandatory. This links the entity to the parent. Okay, so now let's see how to create a relationship CSV file. A generic CSV Parser ETL is able to import relationship, performance, or system-related information data from an input file. For example, this ETL is able to perform and import both system data, metrics like CPU utilization, IO rate, or so on. And for example, business driver data, metrics that represent business drivers such as web page hits, number of users logged in, or so on. Or simple relationship data. The scope of this webinar is to show how to import relationship data to build a business service view appropriately, but the fundamental is the same for all the modules. So you need to make sure that all the lines with the object definition must be filled when they are mandatory. The relationship to the root app is mandatory when you are creating the subdomain, the parent subdomain. The entity assertion should occur first, then relationship assertion. So On the left, we are seeing the entity assertion with the mandatory fields. On the right, we are seeing the relationship assertion that may contain all those mandatory fields. Both entity and relationship assertions will contain timestamp values. For this purpose, you need to specify the timestamp the same for the entity assertion and the relationship assertion in the CSV file. Now, let's take a look at this demo. In this demo, I will show you how to create and execute an ETL template. We will look at the input data, then we will import the data from the CSV file in order to see the hierarchies created in TSCO. The first step is to create an ETL template. So by clicking on ETL system tasks, ETL tasks, then add edit open ETL template, I'm going to create a new ETL template which is going to give me exactly what I'm looking for. From the options available, I'm going to select the comma-separated value CSV file and the select data type, which is going to be catalog of entities and relationships. Click on next. Then I'm going to choose my file from the operating system. I already loaded my file over here, so what I'm going to do is to upload the file. Then I'm going to show you the contents. So the ETL in this phase, the column mapping is going to map the original column with the mapped column in TSCO. If all of them match, so I see this OK message over here. If there is an error or something, so this particular section is going to suggest what you have to do in order to avoid the error. Could be like the timestamp or any other value within the file that might have errors and you have to correct it. Click on next. Then I give a name, my template. Oops. Click on finish. So I have now my template created. I'm going to add a new ETL. So my new ETL is going to be a CSV. From the list, I see here the object relationship CSV Parsers ETL. I'm giving a name to the ETL task. Then I'm going to look for the entity catalog, which is going to be shared, the object relationships, the new domain where this particular ETL is going to be is my business service webinar. The file location where this particular file, my CSV file is in a local directory. So I'm going to show you real quick where it is. So this is my sample file. So I'm going to show you exactly what the input file has. So it contains the same information that I loaded from my local hard drive. So basically it contains a business service called my business service, contains two different applications. The first one, my application 1, the second one, my application 2. It contains also the entity creation, then the relationship creation, and then I'm creating here my two VMs. In this case, I'm creating this particular one which finishes in 07 and the 09. So I create my VM and then I assigned a relationship directly from this VM to the application 1 and the application 2. Note that I'm using the strong lookup fields over here. So for the VMs, I'm using name and entity type as strong lookup fields, and for the apps or subdomains, in this case, I'm using only one strong lookup field, which is name. In in my local system, I have my SF file, which matches exactly what this file contains. So basically what I did was to copy over this to my to my server, and then, well, I have all this information over here. Just to continue with the ETL creation, basically what I need is the location where this file is. In this case is OPT BMC PCR repository. Then I copy my location over here, not going into subdirectories, and I'm gonna do nothing after the file is parsed. I'm gonna take advantage of the simulation mode, so I'm going to click on No for the simulation mode, and then click on Save and run the ETL. Checking the logs just to see whether or not the ETL finished. Yes, it finished. Then I'm going to my workspace domain where these particular VMs are. So note that the VMs are over here in my my VMware vCenter subdomain, where I have my service extractor running. So basically it is underneath a cluster, and these are my two VMs that I'm using for this purpose. Collapsing over here, then I'm going to look for business service webinar subdomain. This is where I have my business service. I have my application 1, my application 2, and then I have my two VMs. So in this case, the sysid for this VM is 4975, and if I look for this particular VM over my subdomain for VMware, is going to be the same, 4975. So the demonstration here is that I'm replicating this particular VM over a different hierarchy for the business service purpose, and basically I'm not creating a duplicate over here, just to just to let you know. Okay, so the last step is going to be to tag my business service. So this is a mandatory step in order to see the information in the view. So you can do it manually. You can do it with an ETL that creates tags, but this is something that is mandatory in order to see the information in the presentation server. Okay, so I created my tag, and now I have, I has not created the tag. Importance, high, add tag, and now I have my tag over here. Okay, this concludes this part of the demo. In the next demo, I'm going to show you other information about the creation of hierarchies with the SQL Extractor. So let's continue. Okay, so let's move on to the next topic. In this topic, I'm going to talk about the Object Relationship SQL Extractor ETL and how to configure this SQL query to extract the relationships. The way the data is imported by this ETL is similar to the CSV Parsers ETL. The difference is that the query does not require the timestamp field for the data queried from the database. The remaining fields do have the same format as the CSV Parsers ETL. The query must contain all entities including apps or subdomains. The single lookup or multiple lookup approach should also be present here. Then the relationships query has to create the relationships among all entities. In the first screenshot, you can see that the query must contain all entities involved in the CMDB extraction. So basically, the mandatory fields are the resource name in the data source, and the entity type. And the relationships query must provide all parent-child relationships among all entities. So basically, you need here the end can parent, which is the father entity, and the DS end parent, which is the fodder resource name in the data source. Now, on this demo, we will see how to operate the database relationship SQL extractor. So let's take a look at the demo. On this demo, we will see how to operate the database relationship SQL extractor ETL by extracting some data from a database server and creating a relationship workspace in TSCO. First, we need to create a DB external connection because this is required by our ETL template. The way we can do and create this particular object in TSCO is by creating or adding a connection over here. So you need to provide a name. The mandatory fields are name, database user, database password, hostname, port, seed or service name, and the other thing that you have to take into consideration here is the database type. If the database is not listed over here, so you need to place a database driver on the ETL server in order to let it work properly. In my case, I created this external database connection, which is called my connection. This is connecting to my BCO own instance in TSCO, and it's going to extract the data just to put that data into the workspace domain. Once you have the external DB connection done, you can go to the ETL tasks section and add a new open ETL template. The new open ETL template is going to be a SQL query, the data source type, and the selected data type is going to be a catalog for entity set relationships. Click on next. Then here you have to put your SQL query. So I'm going to show you how I did create this relationship and entities tables and how we are going to do it after this. So in my SQL developer, I have a table called entities and another table called relationships. These tables go and have some different fields or columns. So the first one contains the entity name, the DS entity name, which is basically where we put the lookup values, the entity category, which is whether or not the system is a system per se or is a app or subdomain, the entity type that basically tells if the system is going to be, for example, a generic system, a VMware virtual machine, or a VMware, an Azure virtual machine, or Amazon Web Services virtual machine, or whatever. So the strong lookup fields define exactly how we are going to map this particular entity within the entity catalog in order to create or to put this entity in another hierarchy. Then the relationships contain almost the same structure, but this particular table is going to have the relationships. So my first approach over here is how I did create the entities. So basically I have a system or an app called my business service 2, which is the parent of all this structure. I have the application 3 and the application 4, which are in the middle of the structure, and then I have my guests. All these guests are VMware systems. So basically I have created in the DS entity name field, which is going to be over here, I put my strong lookup fields, which are name and entity type for each of them. and then I define my strong lookup fields here, name, ampersand, and entity type. Then, as I have to put all my strong lookup fields all over my entities and applications and subdomains, so I put my name, the name of a strong lookup field for the application and for the business service as well. And the relationships is going to be almost the same. The only difference is that I have to assert the relationship between the child and the parent. In this case, I'm asserting the relationship between the two applications, this application over here and this application over here, with their parent, which is Business Service 2. And these 4 VMs have the same situation where their parent is application 3 for the 2 first and the 2 last rows contain application 4 as a parent. I'm going to run all these scripts, and then we can continue with the ETL creation. So first, I'm going to create the tables. Then I'm going to insert all the values within the tables. Great. So these 2 queries are going to be my queries for the ETL. The ETL will use these 2 queries in order to create the relationships. So now that I'm here in my TSCO environment, I'm going to use the same queries that we saw in the SQL Developer screen by using my connection as a data source. Running this is in the primary scheduler. Click on Next. Now I have all this information. So all my columns are mapped together, and in my column number 1 I have the entity name. Then I have my DS entity name, which is basically where I have my strong lookup fields, which type of system is, for example, app or system, and which is the entity type, and then the strong lookup fields. So the message clearly says that all columns are mapped. So I'm going for my second query, pasting here my second query and click on Next. Same result. All the columns are listed in OK status, and I have all my relationships listed over here. Click on Next. I'm going to put a name for this particular ETL, SQL Relationship Template. Okay, click on Finish, and voila. So now I'm going to create my ETL based upon the template. Template SQL query over here, then my entity catalog, shared, object relationships. I'm going to choose business, service, SQL query. My ETL is going to be named the same way. The connection parameters, I'm going to use my existing data source to connect, and I have all my settings done. I'm going to run it in simulation mode just to make sure that this runs fine, and then I'm going to switch to production. Show log. My ETL ended in status OK, so it means that I can change or I can switch to the simulation mode in No. Click on Save and run the configuration again. So now I'm going to my workspace domain where I have all this information. So my subdomain is still waiting to be populated. Now I click again, and now I have my business service 2, my 2 applications, the guest over here. So all the relationship that I wanted to build is over here. So I'm gonna create a tag for this business service. Select the tag, add tag. So now my business service has been tagged, and this concludes this demo. So in the next demo, I'm going to show you how to create the service pools and how to see this data into the business service view. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. This slide will talk about creating business services hierarchies. When you create a business service hierarchy tree in TSCO, what you want is to create a new tree that contains the hierarchies to be used on the view. The CSV file should be provide all entities, assertions, and parent-child relationships among all entities. This applies for the database extractor or the CSV file. Remember to assert all entities before providing relationships. For entity assertions, these are the following fields required. So you need the business service type, the regular domain type, and the application type, but this application type is not mandatory. On the file or on the SQL query, you have to specify the domain prefix. For business service is SVC. For regular domains is generic, and for applications is app. Make sure that this is you put the correct domain prefix. They are case sensitive. Business service view supports a number of technologies. Based on those systems, it creates the hierarchies. Then you can use different ETLs to import performance metrics to those entities. If you are importing hierarchies through the CSV Parser or database extractor ETLs, you have to make sure that along with the system, the subdomain are created too. So in order to build the tree, it requires a subdomain, a domain type generic, a business service, domain type business service, and lastly the application, which is optional and its domain type is application. All these components will become the parents of the systems that you like to create in the new workspace domain. So once the entity subdomain is created, the relationship must be created in order to complete the tree. All these relationships are based on either single or multiple lookups. In the second screenshot, you see how the relationship has been created. So you have on the top level the business service, which is a regular domain or a generic domain. Then you have your business service cells, then the application region 1 and region 2. Within the region 1 and region 2, these are the service pools, which are created automatically by the business service view when all this structure is completed. So let's take a look at the business service view and let's see this demo. Okay, so now that we are in the business service demo, I have to tell that once all the hierarchies are created in TrueSight Capacity Optimization, the second step is to configure the tab on the business service and build the service pools. When this is done, the data will be displayed automatically after some time. It depends on how big is the environment, and you have to take into consideration that the business service in the business service, application server is optional, and the business service shows all the service pools contained in all the applications belonging to the service. So let's take a look together. I'm opening my presentation server, and I already put all the tags in my business service, so I'm one step ahead. And basically, you know, when you create these tags, so this is a mandatory step in order to create the hierarchy properly. Once you are here in the presentation server, it means that you already created or you already tagged all your business services, and we are coming over here just to configure this view. So as a first, you need to configure the view, and you see this pop-up window that says that you need to proceed with the configuration by clicking in this link. So first, you need to select the domains where you have your business services. In my case, my business service is on the business service SQL query, and the second one is on the, let me see here, the first that we did together before was the business service webinar. Business service webinar. So these two domains are going to be part of this approach. I have my two domains here. So now I have to select the tag. So in my case, I selected importance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag and drop the two tags that I'm using on my business services, and I'm going to create the service pool. So the service pool is created by hitting on this button, refresh views, and this may take some time in order to create the business service. For these purposes, for sure, this is going to be almost automatically because my environment is very small. So we can see it in the workspace domain. Click on save, and then I'm going back to my capacity optimization console. I refresh my systems, and I can see the service pool created. So the service pools are going to be created based upon the applications. So if you have two applications, two service pools are going to be created. In this case, I have my service pools, and I'm almost done. So now I have to go back to my TrueSight Capacity Optimization, or the presentation console, and I'm going to refresh the view just to make sure that we can see the information. The data is not available at this moment because it may take some time just to compute all the indicators, and depending on how big is the environment, how many data are going to be sit over here, so we need to wait. Sometimes what we recommend is to do this the day before. It means that you create your service pools, you create everything, and then the day after you come to the office and you can open the view and you're going to see the information here. But for the most part, this may take between 20 minutes and 4 hours. So, but like I said before, it depends on how the environment is, how big. Okay, so let's refresh once again the view to see if the hierarchies have been created and the information is there. And yes, so we have so far one service with no saturation. So you can see that, and in this in this table we can see the legend where we can see basically the saturation between, you know, the forecasted date to saturation, which one is saturated now and which one is going to be saturated from day 1 until day 90, or no saturation at all. So in this particular bubble that I'm seeing here, I can click on it and drill down to see the information. So my business service 2, which was the business service that I created with my SQL Extractor ETL, it contains application 3 and application 4. And basically, so the application 4 has a service pool which is in risk of saturation. The other one is normal, no saturation. So we can click on it and basically see the guest over there, part of an application that may have the risk of saturation. So these are the two guests with the problem, and basically you can see, or you can take actions over the problem that is basically reported over here in the business service view. So the more applications you may have, the more information you are going to see here. Like, for example, if you have more than 2 tags, for example, you have high, medium, or low priority, or whatever the information is going to be here in the y-axis. So this is going to show the bubbles corresponding to the forecasted saturation and the priority that you want to put on the bubbles. So this concludes the demo. I hope you have enjoyed this demo, because it's really exciting to see how this information can be displayed on this view. And well, let's see if you have any question. Okay, so let's move on to the troubleshooting guides. For further assistance on common issues, we have recently created the TSCO troubleshooting guides that contain different topics included install, upgrade, and out-of-the-box ETLs and KA reference. You can use these guides in the TSCO documentation under the troubleshooting section. These guides are based on the knowledge and experience assisting our customers during the ETL implementation or whatever the topic is. The guides include references to knowledge articles, to known and common reported issues, and steps on how to collect logs and other relevant information in case you need to contact BMC technical support. So now let's take a look at the troubleshooting common issues. In this case, the problem is that the data is not populated in the workspace domain. So in this case, the solution seems to be that the ETL configuration, which must contain 2 different queries, one for entity assertion and one for relationship assertion, maybe the ETL is missing one of the 2 queries. Another thing to consider is how the entities are created. Beyond that, start with the generic ETL debugging techniques. Review the ETL output, log and error log to see any message. Review the ETL log file without this extension. This is a CSV file with a preview of the extracted data, and this whether the CSV is empty but no data is loaded into BSEO. Look at the ctl.log file and check if there are any SQL errors. So basically, you need to create one ETL that contains both entities and relationship, and the hierarchy should contain or should have a reference to the root tab folder level in order to stick the hierarchy to the workspace domain. The second issue is when you have a third-party database which is not listed in the selected data or database types. So this is you need to put the JDBC driver on the ETL server and the app server. If you don't do that, so basically you are going to have this problem. The SQL Extractor fails with error, and the process cannot be started, and you get like a big extract trace. The cause for this particular issue is that the third-party driver has not been placed on the cpit-based ETL libx directory. The jar needs to be placed on both servers, app and ETL server, and the file is put on just one server, either app or the ETL. The Java-based ETL will throw an error. Another problem that we have seen on this implementation is that the combination of a user password is correct to connect to the database. Maybe the other issue is that you get a timeout. So basically you need to make sure that the server protocol is allowed to connect to the database on the port. And if you have a proxy or firewall sit between TSCO and the third-party database. The last troubleshooting common issue is when the ETL does not load any data from the data source, one CSV or another database, while performing an historical data recovery. So if you are performing an historical data recovery and you are importing data from 6 months ago or 1 year ago, so you have to make sure that the aging configuration is disabled in TSCO. So this will allow to load already aged data into TSCO. If you don't do that, so basically the ETL will finish in a normal behavior, but you won't see the data because the data is being ignored in the staging area. So that data will be dropped because the aging configuration is not doesn't have the metric resolution that this timestamp of the data has. So the solution is either temporarily disable the aging configuration, and then you can tail the CPID base data hub log wh.log file and see, for example, when the particular message store sys launcher or workload sys launcher wakes up. So it will get some information and then it will tell you, okay, so I'm gonna sleep. So when that happens on those brackets, you're going to see that the data are going to be processed after some minutes, depending on how many data you are importing into TSCO. But this is basically the main solution when you are importing an historical data into TSCO. Disable temporarily the aging configuration and make sure that this allows the data to be populated into TSCO. This is the reference section I have mentioned through the presentation. These are useful knowledge articles that are related to topics covered on this webinar. I will not go through the list, but they will be included as clickable links on the BMC communities page for the webinar. In summary, we have that the ETL module types are so you have to look for the ETL that best suits your needs to import the data from your data source, either a CSV Parser or database Extractor ETL. Check how the lookup values are defined in your environment. If you are implementing this solution with an existing ETL that actively imports data, check the field default compatibility to see if you can implement multiple lookup approach. Once you import the data, make sure that all the business services subdomain have been tagged properly. Remember that the service pools require a business service type. The application is optional, but it helps to give granularity to the different service pools. For data validation, make sure that the hierarchies have created appropriately. This means that support system type should have been imported into the hierarchy. You can also check for the system sysid and compare it to the existing system to see if there are duplicates. Lastly, go to the business service view, configure the view with the domains where the business service are, apply the tagging rules based on the tag types, and click on the refresh view to let the service pool be created. Take into consideration that this process may take some hours to complete depending on how big the environment is. Finally, do not hesitate to contact BMC support if a problem is more complex that requires a subject matter expert. This concludes my presentation, and back to you, Greg.
Thank you. And now I'll take us through the self-help in contacting BMC. The YouTube channel where this webinar will be posted is available at this link. It contains past webinars as well as a rich set of how-to videos. The Connect with TrueSight webinar schedule that contains future webinars as well as our past webinars is available at this communities link. Also, the Hot Off the Press newsletter contains trending information. And to contact technical support via web, phone, email, as well as these social channels are available through these links. That will conclude our session today. Thank you for attending.